All right, welcome to Workforce Navigator. I'm Rodrigo Alcaine, CEO of Eastridge Workforce Solutions, and welcome to Season 2. I sit down with workforce architects, operators, economists, and thought leaders to talk about how to build, lead, and sustain great workforces. And today is a guest of one of the sharpest labor economists working today. He talks with many employers across the country every single week. And what he's seeing about who's actually competing for your workers is going to change how you think about your talent strategy. So, Ron Hetrick, welcome to Workforce Navigator. We're excited to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so I am a 34-year labor economist. Started my career at the Bureau of Labor Statistics in DC. Ended up supervising the payroll employment survey with one other person. I started writing a lot back at that time. I left and then took on kind of a lead economics role in a very large staffing company and did that for 20 years. And I came to MC now Lightcast back in 2020 during all the fun. And that's where I've been since. Really, what it is, I am primarily an author, researcher, and then I travel the country speaking about the demographic drought. I wrote something called Who's Going to Do the Work, and then The Rising Storm. And this year, a new research piece that I contributed to called Fault Lines.
Very cool. And if you haven't had a chance to check out Rising Storm, I highly, highly encourage you to check it out. I'm fortunate to partner with Ron and Lightcast. You know, one of my favorite things, Ron, is reading your LinkedIn post. I think, especially now after the jobs reports and those sort of things, it really provides a lot of thought leadership, but divergent thinking. It makes you think about things really differently, which is why I'm so excited to have you on today. Having said that, I mean, you speak to a lot of employers all across the country every single week. What are some of the biggest workforce challenges that you're actually hearing about right now?
Now, you know what's so great about labor economics is that it's always changing. Like what was an issue a couple months ago could be a different issue today. And I think what we've really seen in the past year, what resonates in every audience that I speak to, which is literally from healthcare through tech, through skilled trades to industrial, is just this kind of jarring level of uncertainty that we've been facing. People just don't know what to do. We've been almost paralyzed. And I think you look at the hiring numbers, you look at a lot of things, and you just see an economy, a labor economy, where everybody's like, I don't know what to do. So you've been hearing about this no hire, no fire. I mean, that's a very real, observable data point that we can look at that, despite all this weakness, despite a lack of payroll growth, you're not seeing any increase in unemployment claims. You're not seeing, in fact, last month, I think we ran one of the lowest unemployment rates for production workers ever. We are in this crazy time where labor is still very, very tight, despite the fact that people are really kind of frozen. They're hiring in teeny bits and pieces, but people don't want to commit to anything just yet until they feel that there's a little bit more stability. And I think, even the situations that's happened in the past week or so, that's kind of what illustrates this kind of, this paralyzed way of feeling. CEOs don't want to go to their boards and say, hey, we're going to hire a lot right now, when everybody's like, wait a minute, we don't really even know what's going to happen tomorrow. So
Right.
that's the biggest issue that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I agree, and it's very consistent what we're hearing with our customers as well. And I think that is the theme. I feel like for us, at least for the last 2 years, is uncertainty has certainly been thematic. Is there any specific industry or region where you're seeing it more prominent than others, or is it pretty agnostic?
I would say it's pretty agnostic. There are some areas that you'll hear people say, look, we're not having any problems at all. Life is just great. And then you go, that's good to hear. I'm glad you're doing well. And then they kind of look at you and go, well, I mean, I don't want to use well. It's okay. So I think the truth of the matter is everybody's just uneasy. I think I've increasingly heard, hey, we have had good candidates and we've had a little bit of problems placing them. And I'm like, treasure those good candidates, because that's not stacking. We can see that, like I said, in the claims numbers, and a lot of what we're seeing, we're not exactly building up a loose supply here right now. So it's not going to take much to reverse that feeling. So that's why I think, no one's immune from it. There are parts of the country that are losing population. There are parts that are gaining labor force. But they all seem to be saying the same message, and that is, hey, it's not great.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned either supply or demand from that perspective, and the jobs report and all the data points that we're getting, and then you stack that against even some of the all-time high billing hours that we're seeing now in staffing, and it's just even that trying to make sense of all those things. Of, it seems very dichotomous in many ways, and so it's, I think, which then creates more uncertainty, right? Because you just don't know what to anchor in, which is really interesting. You mentioned, again, going back to kind of the supplier, the great talent that may exist today. So there is a lot of talk about labor shortage, though. So especially in manufacturing, from your perspective, as an economist, what's really driving that shortage? And do you think it's cyclical, or do you think it's something much deeper than that?
Oh, it is something much deeper than that. In fact, the biggest mistake anybody could make is to believe this is cyclical. That would be a tragic mistake. So we really have to start to look at this in these kind of terms. So you have to start to think about who takes these jobs. What's the typical profile of people that would be coming into manufacturing? They're probably, going to be men. Doesn't have to be, but in a lot of cases, it's going to be men. And how old are those men? Well, some of them are probably going to be in their early 20s, or they're going to be in their late 20s to early 30s. Otherwise, you have, some people kind of moving around who may be a bit older, but that labor pool is going to be a little bit different. So let's talk about 20 to 24-year-old men. We have the same number. We've had no growth in our population of our labor force of 20 to 24-year-old men in the past decade. It's the same number, but the population during that time has grown by like 24 million. This particular part of a labor force that you would want to be growing to fill these types of jobs isn't growing at all. And yet the demands on that labor force from so many different angles, which we can talk about in a little bit, is so extraordinary. So I think that that's one of the biggest things. I think a lot of people would be surprised, especially, lately there's been this big AI narrative and it's taking jobs and young people can't find. We got to be careful. The unemployment rate for 20 to 24-year-old men in particular is hovering around its lowest number in all of history outside of wartime. That may shock people. Like, we're talking only record lows of available young men, like 2024. Even for 25 to 34-year-old men, we had a big boost because of immigration, but once immigration was reversed, we haven't seen any change in that population in the past year. So being stuck when everything else is moving forward is a problem. And that's a problem that it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So people who need things keeps growing. The people who provide things isn't growing. And then you have to get to that last part of that, which is we are still very dependent on labor for a lot of arduous tasks, a number of different industries: construction, warehousing, manufacturing. Those kind of people are also needed in retail and restaurants. And, if you look right now, the top 10 most posted jobs in the country right now, nurses, number one, number two, retail sales. Employers are looking for a certain type of person, probably not degreed, physically capable. And that's what we just imagine your warehouse. You just don't have a lot of those people sitting in the warehouse ready to go. And I think the last part of that is we have to be very, very mindful of college degree, and that's not necessarily attainment, but just being occupied in college. So if you're in there 4, 5, 6 years, waiting to get this degree or getting another degree, you're probably not engaged in the labor force. And I think that's why we've seen the labor force participation rate for young men in particular stay at such a low level. It's been pretty poor now for quite a long time.
That's right. Yeah, and when you think about kind of the changing dynamics of the workforce and what's important for, flexibility comes to mind a lot, right? And so
Yes.
you have these traditional shifts that have still continued to exist. How does that, oftentimes we're speaking to our customers and they have unfilled roles, and they'll say, well, let's raise our wages to try to attract talent. But quite frankly, they do that, and then oftentimes the needle doesn't move because it's, again, I still think that could be a problem, but there's something much greater that's happening. And which then also speaks to is like, the manufacturing client is not competing against other manufacturing talent. And so talk us through a little bit, what are those different competitive challenges that is causing some of these roles to go unfilled?
I think there has to be a greater understanding of good enough. It seems like that's cropping up in a lot of places right now, good enough. And in this particular case, what you're talking about is the wage differentials between manufacturing and like fast food used to be very, very broad. I mean, it was like minimum wage or barely above minimum wage. And then who knows, 14, 16, $18 an hour. But the pandemic changed that dynamic permanently. Where you had a fast food restaurant that was maybe paying 8, started paying 16 within 3 months. Well, we don't give those things up. So if you're in a job, you don't go, hey, you know what? Remember when I gave you 16? That's now 8 again. Like, no, you're out of here. And I think that changed the game, because what that means is other factors start to come into play. So you would think that, we have to remember the 40-hour work week was a construction of the government. Now, it was done at a time in 1940 when manufacturing was an industry that was, predominant. They needed a predictable time. People needed to be compensated for overtime. So we kind of cemented that as the law of the land. But that isn't the law of the land. There are many industries that don't operate under that kind of rigidness. And if you think about where things have evolved, almost like I call the free agent market. So these are the delivery drivers, the Uber market, as we call it. Retail, restaurants, the ability to sleep till noon, start your shift at 5, get tips, leave at 11, and make as much, maybe a little less, maybe more than you would have made sitting on a factory floor, morning to night, doing your 8-hour shift or 12-hour shift. And I think this concept of good enough is a very lethal situation when it comes to people who do 40-hour work weeks. Because we've not had those things. I mean, we go back in our time. I mean, we had delivery drivers. You delivered pizza. I did it when I was in college, and you didn't make a whole lot. But now, if you talk to your Lyft or your Uber driver, which I do, one of the things that's been really fascinating is they'll say, I know how many trips I have to take to hit my number for the week. So if I get up at 4 a.m. and take people to the airport until 9, I can hit my trip number, the amount that I need to make, and then I'm done. 9 a.m., done for the day. I can do whatever I want. And I think about those kind of things. I'm like, wow, that wasn't a thing. That wasn't a thing before. The world has really changed. And I don't think it's catastrophic. I don't think it's like we should all be like freaking out. It's more of, it shows you that these things, these trade-offs, where you would say, well, I'll just pay more. People are looking at that pay going, well, yeah, I mean, but that pay comes with expectations.
That's right.
I will be there every day at this time. And if I don't clock in at this moment, my boss is going to come yell at me. Versus I'm an Uber driver. I clock on when I feel like it, and I clock off when I feel like it. Oh, my baby's crying. I'm off. Now they're settled. I'm on. And I think that this is just understanding that that's a competitive pressure. So
Absolutely.
you have to come up with other competitive aspects other than, just pay.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's almost like the 8-hour shift or the rigidity around that type of schedule is almost a competitive liability.
It is.
And the other piece that we see often is, a lot of these organizations might have like a 3-strike policy, right? So attendance 1, strike 2. Well, they don't even show up for strike 3 because they know that they can go drive Uber or
That's right.
DoorDash or whatever it might be and still make the same or equal more wages. So there's almost less risk around that for the workforce. So it's really interesting on how to make that all work for your total ecosystem.
Yeah, and I don't want to like overstate it, because there's always going to be a percentage of the population that loves a predictable week. They
Sure.
love that I get up, I work my shift, and I go home at night. That it's not an everybody thing, and I think we always get ourselves into trouble painting with broad brushes. However, that being said, kids growing up in the world today do see those things. I remember when my son was in high school, and he's well beyond that point now, but I remember him saying like the aspiration that everybody had back then was door dashing. It was no longer working at the fast food or the retail place that was around you. They loved this idea of man, I can't wait till I, turn 18 and I can DoorDash. And I think that if you hear those kind of things coming out of young people's mouths, you have to really regard that. They have thought about it. They've talked to their friends who are doing it or their friends' siblings who are doing it, and that is influencing their behavior. And then they go forward into society with that construct. This is an option. I can do these things. And that stays with them. And we have not dealt with a generation that was, for lack of a better word, that empowered.
That's right. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that goes back to the lifestyle versus pay concept that you were talking about, and having that type of flexibility and autonomy around your schedule. And it's interesting because, some of these potential employers are starting to get creative around how they're looking about outcomes versus hours worked, and how do they achieve those things to still create this environment of flexibility to cater to. And that's the other thing I think you and I have talked about, is there's also 5 different generations in the workforce. That means there's 5 different ways of people like doing work. There's 5 different ways people how like to procure talent, to find
Yeah,
work.
that's right.
And considering, as you mentioned, the workforce not really changing their availability, it's like you can't alienate any one of those populations today, because then it just creates even more challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that goes back into now thinking about the supply conversation. Obviously, immigration is a big point of discussion around immigration and labor supply, being another major factor in the market. Can you explain how immigration has historically impacted the U.S. labor supply, and especially within the non-degree roles?
Sure. I think, there was always a certain tacit understanding about immigration, how it came in, what just about that number was. I mean, we ran about a million for a long, long number of years. In Trump's first presidency, that ended up edging down. Obviously, the rhetoric was pretty strong during that time. So we saw it go from a million down to about 600,000. And then, during the pandemic, we had a big labor shortage issue. So the way we kind of solved the problem was we granted asylum status to a number of countries. And that asylum status, also called parolee status, meant that if your country was deemed to be dangerous of some sort, some kind of instability, you could come here and apply for asylum. Now, that process takes about 150 days. However, when you have well over a million, maybe up to about 2.5 million people seeking asylum, well, then the line to get that work permit gets incredibly long. So at some point, we end up with a really, really large number of what you can technically say were illegal immigrants. However, we have to be careful. Asylees, until they get a work permit, are called illegal. However, they're perfectly fine. They're not going anywhere. They're waiting for their work permit to come through. So if we go back during this time, we see an insane inverse correlation between work permit approvals and job openings in non-degree jobs. So as those work permit approvals skyrocketed up, job openings, like in manufacturing, which got over a million, started coming down. And so we could see very clearly where this was happening. And during that time, you can actually see one of the myths about undocumented workers is we don't know anything about them. We don't know where they live or what they're doing. And that's absolutely not true. It's not even remotely true. We know where they live. We know what they're doing, especially people in the asylee program. We know exactly what they're doing. And these people were able to work. If they waited 150 days, they could get a tax identification number and they could go to work. So we could see that the numbers in like construction and manufacturing were getting really, really large, 600, 900,000 in that industry. So it solved the problem, right? We had all this wage inflation. We were getting a lot of product inflation because of wage push inflation. And then we, fix the glitch. We get these people in here, that supply increases and wages calm down, pricing gets back under control. And so when we see that those were numbers that were multiples of what we'd seen before, but you have to understand, we didn't get any immigration in 2020 or 2021 because the consulates were largely closed. It's not we had nothing, but we had a much smaller number. So in essence, you were kind of making up for that, but you really made up for it because we had also a kind of a crisis occurring in our own labor force where a lot of people had dropped out. We had about 70 something weeks of COVID payments that people could collect. So they did. They stayed out and they collected those payments. we ended up augmenting that workforce. So that number ballooned a lot. That was not very popular. And then, well, obviously, with the new administration, they revoked all of that asylum status. So they took it all away. Now, if you have one country, Venezuela, they had about 750,000 people had come and applied for asylum. These people were working in construction and manufacturing and such. And then within an instant, that was revoked. So those people, of course, have been heading home. So we have to understand that that was the reason that we solved that labor problem. I mean, we could see those numbers. We could draw these correlations over and over again. We also saw no improvement in our the native-born labor force during this time. So we knew it wasn't our people rising to the challenge. They didn't really exist. So I think it's just a matter of understanding that interplay. I'm not an advocate for immigration as much as I'm an advocate for we have to figure out how work gets done, and then we have to have a strategy and a process for doing that. And I think what was exposed in the past 5 years or so is we have a pretty poor strategy. A lot of people were never told what was happening, the role of asylees, why we were doing that in the first place. A lot of that was kept very quiet. I think that was really bad. I think people should have been told, here's what's happening, here's how many of them are here, here's why they're called illegal. It's not a fitting term, but we don't have another term. And we should have, had we done that, we analyzed it during the time, talked about the contributions, how things were all playing out. I think we could have had a more successful outcome, but we don't do a very good job with immigration. It gets very political, which is very unfortunate. And I think that's the part that, I've truly tried to educate people on is, look, I don't think you understand how we find care workers for nursing homes. I don't think you fully understand why these construction sites, everybody there looks Hispanic. And I don't think you really understand how they're not all the kind of illegals that you're thinking. They're a different kind. And I think that education is the beginning to hopefully having what I always say is more adult conversations around it versus what we've been doing the past several years.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you talk about, I think you kind of shared the impact of the workforce when we did have that labor pool coming through the asylums. But the inverse, or business leaders who haven't been tracking really at that policy level, why should they care about the shifting environment now?
Yeah, if you look at it, when we revoke the status, these people obviously are going home. Now, it's interesting is we've been saying for the past year that tariffs and essentially have been running cover for deportations. So at a point where we truly believed that at the beginning of 25, every economist that I know of, and especially myself, believed that the economy was ready to take off. We thought the conditions were ripe. We were seeing signs at the end of 24, going into 25, that companies were like, we're getting ready to hire. And at that moment, then the first set of tariffs come in, and then everything just completely went off the rails. Well, during that time, we start the deportation process. So as we're sending hundreds of thousands of people out of our labor force, there's a lot of organizations that are very nervous at this time and are, if they were planning on increasing hiring, that is now off the table because they don't really even know what's going to happen. And they're watching their workers kind of depart, and they're thinking, well, I guess that's okay because I don't know what my costs are going to be tomorrow because my input costs are changing like by the hour. And I think all of that uncertainty helped, in a sense, to not experience the pain of a huge shock in the decline of your labor force for this particular population. We saw in the labor force adjustments that just came out in the January, February numbers that we just were released, we saw about 1 million downward revision in the prime age population, 25 to 54. Now that is these departures. That's these people leaving. And so you think about it, unemployment is still historically very low. We don't exactly have a lot of people. I was talking about almost a near record low for production worker unemployment, meaning we just don't have a lot of those people on the sidelines. And you're subtracting, maybe 500 to 800,000 of these people from the labor pool. Like, it should have been an unbelievable shock. And certainly seeing the lack of employment gains in manufacturing and construction last year, people were attributing that to weakness. And we're like, no, you have about 500,000 people that are coming off of payrolls. They had tax identification numbers. They're just coming off payrolls because they were being sent home. So we expected actually more weakness than we got. The industry is probably stronger than you think because we knew these people were departing. We were expecting bigger losses and we didn't actually get them. So I think that's the importance of this, is that imagine that I'm holding a rope, and during all of this time, I'm trying to slacken that rope, but that rope is barely moving. And if the economy decides to take off, why would that happen? I don't know. How about the big, beautiful bill? How about we start spending money again, and companies want to start, they get certain investment monies and they want to hire. Well, the rope doesn't have any slack. So it's going to get pulled tight really, really quickly. Since we have seen the sharp decline in work permit approvals, it's been interesting that we've started to see job openings in these industries starting to tick back up again. But we're not exactly in an environment where the economy's on fire. If the economy starts to try to be on fire, they're going to find that there's no labor force to feed that fire.
Right, right. Well, so given all that, you've got changing worker expectations that we've talked about, competition from other industries, obviously the shift in labor supply. What should employers fundamentally, rethink about their workforce strategies today?
I think the most important thing that I try to tell people is, do not put your head down. And if you start having attrition, especially if you're losing good people, you are experiencing what could be a really cataclysmic event here. The whole point of things is, as employers, we already saw in 21 and 22 what it meant to be reactive. What it meant was almost daily pay rate increases. You have your existing workforce very upset that the person who's coming in who's very low quality is getting paid more than they are, because you need to get work done and you're panicking and you got to get people through the door. We did not have time to do strategy. We were reacting, and those reactions were pretty terrible. We saw a lot of wage inflation. There was no plan to anything. We were seeing workers literally hopping jobs week to week, getting an extra dollar, an extra 50 cents, especially when you're making, that lower level of money. That's a big deal. And if you want to prevent those kind of things, then the strategy needs to be in place where you're looking at certain factors and saying, I believe things are starting to heat up. I'm going to start keeping track of the restaurants in my market. I'm going to make sure that if I go out, I look to see, do they have signs up saying, hey, we're looking for people right now? And you start to see pay levels and you go, whoa, that dishwasher is $20 an hour. That's more than I'm paying, my assembly workers. I think there's just a level of, we are in an environment where you have to pay attention. And, I think it's easy to see the news and not understand the local implications for a national thing. I think that what's happening in your market could be very different from another market. Who's in your market? Who did your economic development group, just approve? Is a Buc-ee's coming into town because they pay pretty well and they need a lot of people, and they're going to take them from you? What we've seen historically is the manufacturing places in some of these areas really get hit hard if something like that opens up in your town. So it just, you should be involved in your community. You should be involved in the kind of businesses they're bringing in. They should know what you're doing, what you're paying people, and that you don't want to see those people taken. Like I said, I think just this entire idea of labor should be the thing you talk about. As you talk about what new products are you going to do, or here's what we're thinking about doing the next year, labor should be an issue that sits at the front of every meeting. How is our turnover? Is everything stable? Is everybody happy? Are our best workers happy? Do we feel like there's any inkling that for $1 more they could be pried away? Those are conversations you want to have in the good times. Actually, that's funny to say it. It's, I guess, in the bad times. Like when business isn't that great is probably when you should have these conversations, so that when things take off, you're not just reacting to everything, and then you get yourself right back into pay rate inflation.
That's right. Yeah, I think two things that you mentioned there is really companies that are kind of winning that talent competition are treating their workforce strategy more like a supply chain problem, right? They're looking
Bingo.
12 months ahead, not 12 days ahead, right? And then what's the data to back it up? And then the second piece is, again, if you are a manufacturing client, stop looking at another manufacturing client to understand why you might have attrition or low wage. It's much greater than that, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that's really, really important. One more question before we get to the last one. If you are meeting with a client and they say, Ron, we just have a high attrition, we're turning over people left and right, what's usually the first question you'll ask them?
Oh, what's your work environment like? Why would I want to work there? Why would I stay? Why do the people who do stay stay? Uh, or do you not have any people who stay? um, it's such a great question. I worked in between undergrad and grad school. I worked in a pulp mill, and I, being a wussy college guy, was really overwhelmed. I worked in a lime kiln. I worked in with the boilers, and I was just blown away by just how hard the job was. But you know what? I was more blown away by were the people that had been there for a really long time, and it was their dream job. They loved it there. Now the options in that town were very limited. So if that factory didn't exist, and by the way, it doesn't anymore. But if that didn't exist, they didn't really have any options. But they truly valued that employer, and they felt that their benefits were good. They felt like they were being taken care of. And even so, even though that work environment wasn't the greatest, and so a person like myself would look at it and go, "Oh my gosh, I can't. This would almost feel like prison if I was here." It wasn't to them. They loved it, and I think that taught me a lot about. It's not my job to judge what your work environment's like. It's your job to monitor. Do people seem to be leaving because what? Is it unsafe? Are you asking a person to do the job of three people? How's the work structured? Are people looking at this going, this is dumb? I mean, if you just move that machine 2 feet over here, we could prevent all of this waste from occurring. I think there's just so many little things, where you can't help but be in the industry that you're in. But just because you're in that industry doesn't mean, work has to be, atrocious.
That's right.
Work can be rewarding, all of those things. And to that point, and this is something I do stress all the time, you should be selling yourself to your community, to your schools, why you're a good place to work, how long you've been there, your contributions, the history that you have, and family members having worked there, and how you've taken care of people. And by the way, if you don't have those stories, better find those stories.
That's right.
Because if you don't have those stories, then why would somebody come and work for you? But you have to believe that what you're doing is good, what you do for the economy is valuable. Young people in particular respond to that. It's when in the times of plentiful labor supply, people were happy to get a job. They took it. You took what you could get. And now we're in a different environment where people go, well, what is this job? I mean, on the surface, that looks pretty awful. Why would I not, why would I want to do this? Get them, the thing I tell employers, get people on your location. Get them to let them see what the job looks like. Don't just go and tell people we need somebody. Have a day where you bring people in. Have them stand beside your existing workers, that these young people can talk to them and say, what do you like about this? What don't you like about it? Not everybody's going to go, well, no, that's not for me. And not everybody's going to be, I love it. The way society works is sometimes people get exposed to it, like the armed forces, and some people go, I'm joining the army. Like,
That's right.
I believe in this mission. And others go, I'm not joining the army. I don't want to be shot. And I think that that's the beautiful part of humanity is there are always going to be a spectrum of people that want to do different things. But if they don't know about you, if they don't know what the jobs look like, they're going to make up in their mind what these things are like. And that may be very unfair, but it's not because they don't know anything else. They don't know anything better. So that's another thing I just tell people is invite people into your environments and don't just go to schools and say, what you do, but try to get people to physically come into the environments that you have and let some of those people just go, you know what, I think this could be for me.
Yeah, I love that. It's really, again, it's the employee value proposition, and it should extend beyond just full-time employee, right? Because it's just the contingent workforce too, from that perspective. And I would
100%.
add is, and if you are telling people who you are as an organization, make sure that matches to the reality of what is actually happening within the organization. Oftentimes we see this mismatch when they're courting talent and they're sharing that, this is the type of organization we are, and then you actually get there and it's actually vastly different. And so I love the idea of inviting people in and truly being able to see that transparency. I think that's, because to your point, people will make a choice today, right? So it's really good. Okay, last question. If there's, and you may have just answered it, but I'll get you another a swing here. If there's one thing you wish business leaders understood better about the labor market now, what would it be?
It's not just what I said, it's what I said earlier, and that is you're not waiting this one out. You
Mm.
know, the situation that we're in, just so everybody understands, this is the last break even year for high schools in the US. After this year, the number of people graduating high school is going to start falling off of a cliff. So you're experiencing the last decent year of births, which was the year right before the housing crisis. Once the housing crisis hit, birth rates took a big hit, and then they really fell off. You know, we've set two record years in the past 4 years for low birth rates in this country. So we are looking at a compounding problem of young people disappearing. And as these young people are disappearing, the universities and such that need their money are going to likely start lowering their entrance requirements, and they're going to start doing everything they can to fill these classes. They're probably going to lower their fees. So your ability to persuade somebody to not go down that path is going to get more difficult because there's not going to be as many of them, and there's going to be a real war to find these people, especially the good ones. There's driven people are the ones that you're going to want to hit. So I think this is why, you know, I put up a post on LinkedIn the other day, which just really took off. But it was about these wage differentials that in the U.S. we so over reward college degrees. You know, the many multiples above what you see for people without degrees, and in other developed nations in the world, that's not true. I mean, they're barely different. In some cases, they're almost equal. You know, somebody who's a software developer gets paid as much as like a plumber, or maybe not much more than a fast food worker. And I think that this is as this kind of war happens, and you need to get work done, and maybe the product you're making is valuable, you're probably going to start increasing pay. And you're going to have to not be nervous about it. You may sit there and go, you know, I mean, this could really hurt my costs. I'm going to have to increase my costs. But you have to understand that everybody is going to be facing that same situation. So that company that tries to hold out and say, I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to increase my prices, may not exist. And I think that this is why I keep saying that you have to keep your head up. You have to be very aware of what's happening around you, because you may think that what you're about to do is a radical move, and 20 other companies have already made that.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, what a way to end. Very, very impactful, Ron. I think it's exactly the kind of insights we wanted to kick off season 2. So thank you. And I think to reiterate, the labor market is not just the backdrop of the business strategy. It is the strategy. And so thank you for helping our listeners really see around the corner today. And for everyone listening, if you hadn't had a chance to subscribe yet, do it now. Share the episode with your leadership team. And anyone that's building a workforce right now needs to hear this. And we'll see you on the next Workforce Navigator. And again, if you haven't had a chance, follow Ron on LinkedIn. His posts always catch fire, and they always give you something to think about. So again, thank you, Ron. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you around.
Thank you.